Welcome to another episode of Monster Monday from the Ready to Die channel. This series explores the design of a creature I have built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The stat block for this creature can be found over on the Monster Monday blog, as well as the Twitter and Discord, all of which are linked below. For our second entry into Menace Monday, I'm going to present a creation that blurs the line a bit between man and monster, while also serving as a little bit of a love letter to a very conceptually cool class from Pathfinder First Edition, the Savage Shifter. Likely because I've been running a campaign themed around a bunch of primalists and brutal survivalists, I've been in the mood for making similar NPCs and monsters, and this design follows that concept. This is kind of an option on the player side of things already with the Untamed Order, and while I definitely tapped into some of the ideas from that, it lacked the exclusive focus I wanted for this. The idea behind the shifter is a person who holds no attachment to their human form, and instead takes on the shapes of various animals. Characters like Beast Boy from Teen Titans, the Animorphs, and several mythological figures come to mind. Though, I did draw the line at the shifter using anything other than animal forms. I didn't want this concept having the shifter turn into plants or elementals, because that's not what they're about. I built the shifter as a level 10 creature, since that is where a lot of these spells that it wants to use for this start reaching the end of their lifespan. Like the only other member of Menace Monday, it just has a humanoid trait, leaving it up to the GM as to decide what exactly ancestry they want the shifter to be. Despite its focus on magically morphing into a multitude of forms, the shifter is designed as a martial combatant, and actually borrows a bit from the soldier roadmap. I wanted to keep its ability scores a little more human for a given value, which means its strength is between moderate and high, despite it being its best score. It follows this with a moderate wisdom inspired by its ability to tap into magic that is traditionally limited to the druid. Based on its physicality, both its constitution and dexterity are in between low and moderate. With that better than average wisdom, the shifter uses a high perception bonus, and may have additional senses based on whatever ancestry the GM uses for the character. While the shifter isn't the most intelligent of individuals, it does have a host of skills with an extreme nature to help it identify a variety of forms to take. It also uses a high survival to manage in the rugged areas it prefers, along with a high stealth to help it hunt or hide from trespassers in this domain. Its athletics and intimidation are both moderate. It relies on its forms for its physicality, and doesn't interact with people enough to know the best way to intimidate them. It has more skills than most creatures I build, which isn't saying much, but still nothing too crazy. Mostly survivalist stuff, and then some decent combat skills. Since this is a humanoid, its defenses are pretty basic at first glance, but there are still a few things to talk about regarding its ability to change shape and how that mixes up its stats. So baseline, the shifter has a moderate armor class, but when it uses any of its form spells, its armor class becomes 18 plus its level, leaving it with an armor class of 28. This is in between low and moderate, making the shifter a bit more vulnerable, but in return it has hit points in between moderate and high. On top of that, whenever it changes shape, it gets between 10 to 20 temporary hit points, which is what kept me from going totally for high hit points. Its saving throws are a bit based on the druid, starting with a high will save, which also plays into its better wisdom bonus. Now while its dexterity and constitution are the same value, it uses a moderate fortitude save with only a low reflex save, which might be a little dangerous for it, but it feels right for its design. Now at first glance, the shifter's offensive options are even more boring than its defenses, being a single fist strike that has a high attack bonus but low damage. However, once again we have to look at the shifter's magic, its focus spells. These have an almost extreme DC, mainly to make it harder for others to dispel their effect. The shifter has Untamed Shift, which I mainly included because that's part of the Untamed toolkit, but much more importantly, it has Untamed Form. As you can see, this is heightened to 5th rank, and is expanded upon by the shifter's Endless Forms effect, one of those bookkeeping passives I talk about every now and then. It mainly takes some of the effects that druids would get from feats they take it for an untamed build, expanding on both the uses of its forms and the variety of them it can assume. Furthermore, this does allow it to go straight from one battle form to another, and it has 3 focus points to use on that. Now we gotta jump back to talking about these shifter strikes, because it gets a bunch of these from its various forms. And when it uses its own attack bonus while under the effects of Untamed Form, it gets a +2 bonus on top of that. This puts its bonus with its strikes all the way to extreme. However, I've looked over a number of the strikes, and even heightened as they are, the damage is usually between low and moderate. After testing this in the Monster Mash, I was pretty happy with it, though it might sound a little lacking. However, it was nice to reliably hit even when I couldn't roll above an 8 on the die, so it does have that going for it. It also has Flowing Fury going for it. I usually wait to discuss reactions at the end, but I wanted an ability that made the shifter's action economy a little bit more efficient. It has to spend 2 actions even to get into one of its battle forms, so this reaction lets it sneak an attack when it uses that spell, which I really enjoyed the imagined visual of it just flowing into a blow from the new form it takes. However, this offensive reaction competes with its Shrinking Dodge, a very flavorful defensive reaction in which it evades an attack by shifting into a pest form. The Tyrannosaurus you're swinging at suddenly becomes a gecko. That immense saber-toothed tiger dodges a fireball by turning into a kitten outside of the area's effect. Stuff like that. The shifter does have to spend a focus point to use this reaction, which led to the justification of it granting a +4 bonus. This is a massive bonus, but one not entirely unheard of. It can also be seen when a creature has greater cover. Additionally, it is only against a single attack or effect, and in the case of it being applied to its reflex save or DC, it just barely breaks a moderate bonus. As for its armor class, this brings it to just below an extreme bonus, which is quite the glow up for this abysmally armored Animorph. Now the shifter does have 3 focus points to play with and only 1 spell that it wants to spend it on, but part of my vision for this creature was it twisting and flowing in between forms. A serpent one instant, a tiger the next, and then suddenly it's an Ankylosaurus. To that end, the shifter can regain focus points through its Savage Surge, which allows it to regain a focus point whenever it critically succeeds on a strike while in a battle form. Unsurprisingly, my test featured the shifter laying out several crits early on, when it was already mostly topped off, only to not be able to roll above a 10 when it did need more focus points. The shifter is tied to the wild ways of the world, which lends it to having a unique ability available in all of its forms, the Howl of the Wild. This is a pretty standard area fear effect with a high DC and a minute-long immunity, but it can also inspire the shifter's animalistic allies, briefly allowing them to become quickened. The beneficial status that it can apply is actually why it has a cooldown at all, albeit a short one. With all that covered, you may notice that there's still parts of the shifter sheet we haven't looked at, and that is because, after some internal debate and some input from the Monster Monday Discord, I decided I wanted to make each form feel a bit more distinct, and that led to the design of abilities limited to the form you're taking. Some of these abilities are pretty standard. Pounce, which I have limited to animal form, is found on a number of creatures. Similarly, the aerial form Soaring Strafe isn't an entirely unique design either. I've seen it a few places, but the one I specifically referenced when writing it up was actually an ability from The Rock. This leaves 2 other forms that have unique actions to them, or unique effects. For example, the insect's form Sickening Display. This might feel a little redundant with its Howl of the Wild, but while it has a high DC, it targets a different save and inflicts Sickened rather than Frightened, a much stickier condition. Personally, I like opening a fight with insect form, and then on your second round, doing a Howl of the Wild followed by a Sickening Display, to make the latter more likely to land and with greater effect. This tactic is one that I used in the Monster Mash, and I did manage to get 1 critical failure against this display, which was handy. I toyed around with a couple of different ideas for the dinosaur form's ability. Most of the ones I had were more defensive options, but I ultimately settled on Thunderous Footfalls, inspired by the immensity of these bestial behemoths. This is a pretty powerful passive, with it being able to make enemies even more vulnerable to the shifter's already extreme attack, which means that it only uses a moderate DC. This should keep it from being too oppressive, and none of my test subjects voiced any issues with it. And with that being the case, we've come to a close on this capricious critter. The Savage Shifter is a mighty menace that mauls marauders and more with multifarious might that may be mistaken for a menagerie most monstrous. In my head, these shifters are likely loners out in the wilds of the world, but they could be members of a druid circle or the head of their own pack of animal allies. Either way, the shifter likely doesn't care for intruders upon its land and likely lashes out, only talking if the heroes demonstrate a kindred spirit, which could range from being fellow shifters, having a closeness with animals, or simply sharing that deep connection with nature. Be sure to let me know what you think of this latest menace, and if you have any suggestions, which you can leave in a comment below. If you want to check out the other monsters and menaces I've built, or even the stat blocks and other versions of this one, you can check out the Monster Monday blog or Twitter. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.